Hi, this is Adam Eliel Berkowitz from Israel 365 News. I'm here with yet another good friend. I'm very blessed to have a lot of amazing good friends who are all bringing Geulah, doing amazing things in the world. And Jonathan is certainly one of them. This is Jonathan Feldstein. He's American, which explains the accent, or originally American, though he's been living in Israel a long time. And he has a 3-decade career in nonprofit fundraising, which means he's spent 3 decades doing good things in the world. That makes him one of the good guys. He's become a respected bridge between Jews and Christians, which is a strange bridge that that not too many people understand. He writes regularly on Christian websites about Israel, and he's. Are you the head of Israel Forever?
No, Genesis 123 Foundation.
I'm sorry, you're right. I Genesis 123 Foundation. And when I say that it's a strange bridge, and Jonathan is out there connecting really distant or seemingly distant points in the world to bring Geulah. I'm not kidding. He just came back from Africa, and I knew that he was there. And from what I understand, a lot of that was having Africa pray for Israel. Is that correct, Jonathan?
That is. It was being the recipient, if you will, of lots of prayers and blessings for Israel, but also having the privilege of reciprocally being a blessing to them.
Well, you better go into details about that. I have to tell you, I did hear once about a Dean Bai, who runs an Aliyah center in Israel.
Right.
He took a trip around Africa, and he had them also praying and singing for Israel. Apparently, there's a deep connection between Africa and Israel. Did you find that to be the case?
Tremendous, absolutely tremendous. Just to kind of take a wider view and how I ended up going there, and so I don't forget, it was not just my first time in Africa. Well, in Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, there are 2 Congos. It was my first time in Africa, and this was not planned long term. Congo was not on my top 10 list, but it came to pass in the context of building bridges, as you noted. Sometimes, as you also know, it's not a easy path, and sometimes it's even a contact sport. But in the context of building bridges with Christians, I make it a point to do so in ways that I say are new, unique, and meaningful. And that doesn't mean just following the money and running after where people will give to support projects that I'm involved with. So naturally, I mean, Africa is a huge continent, hundreds of millions of Christians, and they do have a deep love for Israel. And that's why this trip took place now. It's also very interesting because I would say, by and large, I'm not an expert, but between you and I, having been there, I'll be the expert du jour. And I will say that one of the fascinating things about the African church is that it hasn't really been corrupted by a Western sense of anti-Semitism and replacement theology.
Wow.
So they look at Israel and the Jewish people biblically, historically, from a very pure sense. There's also, which provoked me a great deal, Passover is coming. We are remembering the Exodus from Egypt. We have to remember that Egypt is in the northeastern corner of a continent called Africa. So when speaking to people in Africa, they relate to Abraham spending some time in Africa. They relate to Joseph going down to Africa against his will and building up Egypt as the superpower of Africa at the time. They relate to Jacob coming down and bringing his bones back, and Moses leading that. We discussed many times that Moses' wife Zipporah is referred to as a Cushite, a black woman,
which was actually a huge compliment. It referred to her beauty.
It was a huge compliment, even though she wasn't necessarily African. Her father and her family came from Midian, which is not Africa, although I'm not the expert on that. And people also noted that we have genetic roots in Africa, with
Sure.
King Solomon having a relationship with the Queen of Sheba. So that all was fascinating, and they relate to us. And it opened my eyes to that foundation of why I was so well received.
King Solomon, his connection with the Queen Sheba was also very connected, integrally connected with the temple. A lot of the Ethiopian Jewish community were the descendants of the workmen. My understanding is they're descendants of the artisans that were sent down to Africa to create things for the temple. So there's also that connection.
Well, there's that connection, and then we spoke about the modern connection. The 1967 resolution in Sudan, in Khartoum, the 3 no's, that there would be no recognition, no negotiations, and no peace with Israel. Specifically, being in Congo, there's a sense of repentance there, and a sense, if we go to Genesis 12:3, where God says, "I will curse those who curse you," they believe, many of them, I can't say, there are 100 million people in Congo and 90% are Christian, but there was a profound sense that they believe that they've been cursed because the Congolese president turned his back on Israel, along with many, many other African nations, in 1973, after the Yom Kippur War, and with the push from the Arab League. I brought in, which is also fascinating. We know it, but we don't think about it. And I had to check the date, but it was 120 years ago this year that the British came up with some scheme to put the Jewish people in Uganda. I know you know about it, but I didn't know it was 120 years ago. I had to rethink that. And we could have been their neighbors if that had gone down. So yeah.
What a lot of people aren't aware of, at least as an American, I'm horrible in geography, is you mentioned Egypt. Egypt is like the back door that opens up the door from Israel to Africa. I remember one time I did a bike trip from the Hermonte Eilat, and there was this one point where you get to the south tip of the Dead Sea, and the whole Arava opens up in front of you, and it looks like every African movie I've ever seen. It's the south of Israel, but it's like this desert plain with the trees and the scrub brush that you're used to seeing in African videos. Israel has one foot in Africa.
Indeed, and which relates to, we can come to, not all of Africa is desert. In fact, Congo specifically. Congo, I didn't know this. I don't know if I learned it ever. And Congo's gone through some name changes in my lifetime. But Congo is the 2nd largest country in Africa. It's the 4th largest in terms of population. And it's the only one among the top 5, maybe top 10, that has a vast majority Christian population.
Really?
So we 90% of the country is Christian. The president of Congo is one of the greatest pro-Israel Christian leaders in the world today, who was an advocate for Israel to rejoin the African Union as an observer nation, as chairman of the African Union. This week, some bad stuff went down with that, which is also part of why I went when I did. We wanted to have all of our activities preceding the African Union vote, so we could somehow affect that. But Congo is fascinating, and it's vast, and it borders 9 countries, and it's plush, and they have water flowing everywhere except in the land that they need to irrigate in order to grow agriculture. So they look at us and what you just pointed out as being 2/3 desert, and the fact that we've made the desert bloom. Now, some of it's prophetic. It's not because we're so smart. God said that the land's going to blossom again when we come back. Well, here we are, and yes, it has. And it's not without ingenuity, and it's not without tons of hard work, but they see that and look to us as the older brother who can help them. And they now, in Congo specifically, want to be part of the blessing. They want to continue to bless Israel because that's biblically sound, but they also know and they need our reciprocal blessing to be part of making Congo, not to borrow a US political phrase, but making Congo great again. It is an extraordinary country.
Wow. So Congo is Israel's Christian neighbor, seeking our blessings, our spiritual and material blessings.
Big time.
That's pretty intense. So you touched on something. I just want to tell people who aren't familiar. There was an African Union summit in Addis Ababa in South Africa, and their representatives from many countries. And Israel was granted an observer status, and the Israeli observers were kicked out of the summit. That happened last week. So it was kind of an unpleasant political event. So your presence there, I think, is hugely important, actually fixing what the politicians broke. So fixing it from the spiritual side,
right,
which is hugely important. So I want to know what you actually did. You got off the plane, and then what?
I got off the plane. I didn't even have a chance to change my clothes. I think we went to the hotel, or maybe not. And then I went to speak in a church already. I landed on a Sunday. I went to this outdoor service. There's a huge building, but they were outdoors. Most of the churches that I went into don't have air conditioning. So they were sitting outdoors in plastic chairs, thousands of people, and it wasn't all in neat rows. They were sitting under shelter, under shade, under trees, under canopies that had been erected, and they greeted me with such warmth, and honestly, I didn't know that I was landing and running to speak in a church, but it was extraordinary. And when I spoke, there was tremendous enthusiasm. There was love. I don't speak French. I haven't studied French in over 40 years, but I was able to get by an understanding and have my words translated. And it not to make more of myself than I am, but the reception was thunderous. And then when I finished and walked out, we were seated up front, and then walked out. Everyone wanted to shake my hand and were blessing me. And then we got to the back of the crowd, and people were coming up. This is the beginning of 12 days of people coming and taking pictures with me, just because here I am, this Jewish man from Israel.
Is it so rare for a Jewish man from Israel to go visit them?
In the capacity in which I was building bridges with Christians and discussing that, yes. I discovered at the Chabad, the first Chabad in Black Africa, in Kinshasa, 32 years now, wonderful, wonderful experience, that there's a phenomena of many Israelis commuting to Kinshasa, the capital, and Congo in general, where they're doing business in telecommunications and minerals and diamonds, but not going out and speaking in the churches and not connecting with people theologically as Christians, as brothers and sisters. So that was unique. And then I spoke in 2 other churches. The other 2 churches had Israeli flags on their podium alongside. And it wasn't just because we showed up. In one of the churches, and I will tell you, someone asked me on Shabbat, I hosted friends here. They asked me what was the most powerful experience. And there are a few, but one of them, I was in this massive church that on the Sunday, I spoke there 3 times. On the Sunday, they had over 7,000 people in one service. Yeah, but where the pastor spoke for 4 hours without as much as a sip of water and no air conditioning, and people didn't move. Every service, they sing Hatikva in French.
Get out! Oh my goodness!
It's awesome when you and I, as Jewish Israelis, see hundreds or thousands of people singing Hatikva, whether it's at a soccer game or in any or at a military, in any event. But when you're seeing thousands of Black African Christians singing Hatikva in French passionately, not reading the words because they're not familiar with it, but knowing it. It was extraordinary, simply extraordinary. And that was a core of what I did. But then there were other business things because they want to do business. They look to us to help their country flourish.
Yeah, but there's also, yes, and it's funny. I remember when Israel had the amazing, miraculous rescue mission in Entebbe.
Yeah.
One of the reasons it was successful is that Israel had actually built the airport for Uganda. And that was part of an overall larger plan that the Israeli government was reaching out to Africa.
From the 50s, from when we were an infant state ourselves, we were reaching out to build relations and invest in Black Africa that was also coming out of colonialism at that time.
That's an interesting point. Yes, coming out of colonialism, as were we, in a very real sense.
Correct. And they see that, and it was also fascinating, by the way, on a bit of a tangent, all of the church services were in French, but they translated simultaneous translations in 2 of the 3 of the churches into one of the indigenous languages. And so when they look at us, they not only look at us as coming back biblically and coming out of colonialism, but speaking of language, we've restored the indigenous language of the land.
In a rather miraculous fashion.
Quite fabulous. Quite fabulous.
Wow. So yeah, there has been sporadic efforts that seem to have petered out, that initial push in the 50s, unfortunately. But God willing, you're bringing it back. You touched on something which I find fascinating. You made a point that I think is incredibly poignant. Is Africa does not have a history of anti-Semitism like Europe. Europe, it's, Jews go there. I mean, if you go to Spain, there's still remnants of the Inquisition. England, people don't realize there was an expulsion of the Jews from England for hundreds of years. There's very few countries in Europe. I mean, if a Jew visits Poland, it's tangible. You can feel the anti-Semitism that's there. Ukraine, all of the countries of Europe, and even sections of America, the anti-Semitism is tangible. And the efforts, you have to overcome that first. But Africa really has no history of anti-Semitism. And generally speaking, the people who are racist will be racist against Africans and Blacks, but they'll also be racist against Jews. So we're in the same boat together in that regard. That's a huge point.
Indeed, and I typically don't wear a baseball hat like many Orthodox Jews when I'm traveling, and most of my travels are in North America. But there's some places where you feel uneasy being a Jew, and it's dangerous. And certainly that's throughout Europe, very much. But I made a conscious decision that I wasn't taking off my kippah in Congo. Now, I don't know how many people know that by wearing this, it identifies me as a Jew, but I wore it everywhere I went. And I will tell you, had I put on a baseball hat or worn or taken it off entirely, as some people do when they're traveling, I would not have been the recipient of, and it's not an exaggeration, dozens of people walking up to me in the street, in my hotel, people I didn't know, complete strangers, welcoming me, saying shalom, mistakenly calling me rabbi, but from a perspective of respect, blessing me, taking their pictures with me. This was completely unscripted. It was natural, and I got to experience that.
That is absolutely the antithesis of what happens to Jews when they go to other places in the world.
Indeed.
And I think, the reference to Genesis 12 is, that's clearly it, that they want to come up to you and bless you and be blessed. If Jews can go around in the world and people see us not as tourists, but as coming to bless them, I think that would be amazing, and it would actually be taking our rightful place in the world.
Indeed.
Wow. So, and so they didn't see you as, pardon me for saying this, but they didn't see you as like a white man coming to Africa.
Look, I can't.
I mean, you are very Ashkenazi like me. You know?
We spoke a bit about Moses sending the spies to scout out the land, and it was actually very funny. We had 12 spies from 12 tribes, and I referenced the fact that only 2 of whose names we actually remember, because they came back with a positive report, and I committed that I would come back here with a positive report. And it's not fake, it's real. But they have 450 indigenous tribes, so they would have had a much bigger crowd if they had done that. And I mentioned this, that got a laugh, but it's sincere. But it comes to mind in the context of your question: did they see me? You know, the bad spies said we were grasshoppers in our own eyes. I don't know how they saw me in their eyes and in ours. I don't know how they saw me, if they just saw me as a white person, or it was, which is novel there, right? Which is completely novel. There were white people, but not a lot. But I do know that for those who recognized me and had the, for lack of another word, chutzpah, to come and just say hello to a total stranger on the street, they were saying hello to me and sending their love as a white not as a white person, but as a Jew.
Wow. Well, I think the analogy to the spies is very apt, and I think it shows how great the opportunity you opened. So how did you initiate the idea for this trip?
So I didn't initiate it, and honestly, I didn't necessarily believe it would happen in the context of all of my work with the Genesis 123 Foundation. I'm building bridges with Christians everywhere in the world, everywhere I can. And you probably remember this from the summer after the horrible flooding, even in Pakistan. I started a fundraising effort to bless Christians in Pakistan who are at best second on the totem pole. And it's very dangerous for them to be connected with me as an Israeli Jew. So
Sure.
even in Pakistan, but I manage a WhatsApp group that keeps growing called Africa Praying for Israel. And we've been doing this for the better part of, 2 or 3 years. And we've had a bunch of prayer events together and teachings, and the love for Israel is expressed there. And last summer, I got a phone call on WhatsApp from somebody who I didn't know, who was part of my group. I didn't even know he was part of the group. I should have known, but I didn't. He said, "I'm in Israel. I want to come see you." So he came to see me here on a Friday afternoon in the summer in my house and tells me about his big vision for a program called Congo Bless Israel. They're renting out the 80,000 person soccer stadium and doing a massive pro-Israel event. Now, things happen in Africa a bit slower sometimes than they happen here. The Chabad rabbi advised me when I arrived, the best thing to do is just take off my watch and go with African time, because it's a different time frame. So the event was supposed to have been while I was there, but for various reasons it didn't take place. But the invitation was, come, we're going to connect you. You're going to speak in churches where we want you to speak at this massive event, and that may be rescheduled for next month, in which case I may go back, which would be a privilege. They also set up a variety of meetings with government leaders, representatives of various government ministries, particularly the Ministry of Agriculture. And honestly, I felt a little uneasy with some of that, because I didn't want to go in representing that I'm Jonathan the Israeli who's going to come in and magically bring our irrigation and agricultural systems and energy producing things and create drinkable water in places that they didn't have. These are things that they desperately need, and much, much more. But I'm provoked by it now. I want to find ways, because when we go back to Genesis 12:3, of course, they want to be part of blessing Israel because God says so. They believe that they've been cursed because they turned their back on Israel. But I believe, and you referred to it, that we have a responsibility embodied in Genesis 12:3 to be a blessing to the families of the world. And where more to, I mean, I'll work and help Christians and others in Pakistan if they have a need and if I can be of help, but certainly among our friends in Congo. So this came to pass. It's a bit of a balagan, a bureaucracy to get a visa to go. I had to go to the Congolese embassy in Tel Aviv 3 times in order to get a visa. I had to have a yellow fever shot and malaria. I'm still taking an anti-malarial just as a protocol. But it came to pass relatively suddenly. I would say certainly 3 weeks before my departure, I wasn't even 100% sure I was going.
So when we connect to the evangelicals in America, there's a bit of an agenda. There's a political agenda. There's an economic agenda. We're asking them for their strong political support. We're asking them for their strong economic support. What do you hope to come out of your connection with African Christians?
Excellent question. I will tell you now, and again, not to flatter myself, as a result of going there and sharing my experiences, I now have friends in several other African countries that were jealous that I was there and not in their country, and they all inviting me to come to their countries. What I'm hoping first and foremost is to underscore a true biblically based relationship. Who we are as the Jewish people, what the realization and the now 75 years of Israel's existence means historically, prophetically, obviously biblically, and prophetic is redundant, but it's worth the redundancy. To build relations where we can, I did a great teaching 2 years ago, I think, on Hanukkah with the African pastors and Christian leaders about Hanukkah. There's such a lack of knowledge because they don't grow up in the Judeo-Christian environment where you can get a frozen bagel in the Kroger anywhere in America, and where there's an association of our holidays and Judaism. They don't know. So one of the pastors said at the end of this teaching about Hanukkah, he said, "It sounds like such a wonderful holiday. How come you don't celebrate it more often?" Which is so charming. But there's a thirst. There's a lack of knowledge, and there's a thirst for knowledge and a deep respect for wanting to connect with us. And it's not a place you go to do fundraising. There is, and some people provided financial blessings, and it was generous and from an African perspective, quite significant. But that's not why I'm going. If I'm building bridges with integrity, I have to do it not just going to Texas and Tennessee and Atlanta and other places. And the only thing I'll add, you mentioned the political piece. Certainly in America, where there's a vast number of evangelicals and they live in states and vote in states where many Jews don't exist, and they represent part of the electorate that we as American Jews don't have influence over. Yet there's much more of an inbred democracy. In a lot of these countries, it's not as democratic, and they don't have the way to lobby their representatives that a CUFI does or other Christian organizations do. Nevertheless, I believe that on a spiritual basis, if we're building up Christian awareness and support of Israel, that will trickle down. And then you'll get presidents like the president of Congo now, who I think is probably truly one of the, if not the greatest pro-Israel Christian head of state in the world today.
Wow. How many, do you know how many Christians are in the Congo?
Well, they estimate 100 million people, and 90% of whom are Christians. So we're talking about 90 million. Now, ironically, a little bit to the north, you have Nigeria, which is the most populous country, that has more Christians than Congo has citizens, but Nigeria, because it's currently controlled by a Muslim president, is one of the countries that's not hospitable to us in the African Union.
I'm just trying to do the math. 90 million Christians in the Congo. How many Israelis do we? How many Jewish Israelis do we have now? 6 million, 5 million,
6.5.
Six and a half.
More. We're 9 million people. We're probably
okay. So it's about
7.
I guess 7 or 8 million.
Yeah.
So if you divide it, it's like a million. It's like it's just about 10 Congo Christian people for every Jew. So you got the prophecy coming out. That's fantastic.
And that's just in Congo.
And that's just in Congo.
Not including Uganda, Tanzania, South Sudan, Mozambique, Sierra Leone, Cameroon, South Africa, which as a state doesn't love us, but Christians there do. What other countries did? Nigeria still. I mean, we the last full day that I was in Africa, I hosted a Zoom prayer meeting. We did it deliberately a few days before the African Union, and I had dozens of participants from, I lost count of how many countries, but it was a lot, about a third of all of the African nations, and they were praying for Israel and praying that their leaders would do the right thing in the African Union. And they were praying for forgiveness, for repentance, because of what many of their leaders have done and are doing. So 100 million in Africa, another 100 million, 90 million in Congo, another 100 million in Nigeria, and adding up all of the others, I mean, there might be close to certainly 500 million Christians in the continent.
Wow, that's is this something that other Jewish representatives have done before? What you did was, I think, very, very in a very pure way, a spiritual initiative. Was this the first time? Was this unique?
My first time.
Okay.
The idea for Congo Bless Israel is new, and it's gaining steam. I met a guy on Shabbat, a Jewish Israeli, who I was introduced to, who also, I don't understand exactly what he does, but is somehow in some capacity building bridges, also between Israel and Black Africa, or Jews and Christians. I don't know enough. I'm reasonably sure that I'm not the only one, and I'm not the first one, but I think that there's and I don't mean it in a gross way, an untapped market that simply needs to be tapped. Someone asked me after I came back if I have the interest and commitment and resources to continue to do this. And honestly, it's a whole lot easier to fly to Africa through Ethiopia than it is to go to America, where there's so much longer flight, time difference, jet lag. But I believe it's something that should be invested in, and something that I'm only back now a few days, but I'm committed to finding where I can the resources to be able to do this and not make this my last trip.
My experience with you is that you turn up in the strangest places. I'll turn around, boom, there you are. I don't know how you got there, but you show up. So I have a feeling that this was probably the first, and you're going to be out on the edge surfing into some amazing spiritual territory, opening up conduits of prayer to Israel, two-way conduits where they bless us and God blesses them. I think that's going to be amazing. So, Jonathan,
if it happens, it will be a privilege, a real privilege. It was not a tourist trip.
I think actually this is the tikkun. This is the fixing. Israel started as a secular nation, and people make a big deal out of us being the startup nation in high tech. But I think Israel really needs to take its place as a source of blessing, as a focal point of prayer. We have the custom of praying towards Jerusalem. If more and more non-Jews, could turn towards Jerusalem as a source of prayer and blessing. I think politics, we're not going to beat them politically. Politics is just going to be set aside for the more important agendas. And I see what you're doing as that in its purest form. I'm totally blown away. And who would have figured you went out into the Congo, put on your pith helmet and went out into the Congo and said, I'm going to blaze trails for tefillah, for prayer, for blessing. And you did it. I'm blown away. I'm really blown away.
I was given, I don't want to misrepresent that this was my initiative. If I had not been invited and this opportunity was not presented, I think in all honesty, I would not have gone, at least at this time. But the stars aligned. This was a divine appointment on so many, many levels. And it was a blessing to me. And I'll tell you this, I shared the video of pictures every day, experiences every day on my Facebook specifically. And anyone can go find me and follow and check those out from the 12 days I was there. But the one that blew me away was the singing Hatikva. On Shabbat, I visited with some friends who wanted to hear more. And one of my friends is a teacher. He said, Jonathan, that video of the church singing Hatikva in French, thousands of people, made him cry. And then he went to school the next day and he showed it to all of his students.
Wow. That's what should be. It should be that more and more people around the world should be singing Hatikva, which literally means the hope. The hope. Our hope is the whole world's hope for redemption.
Well, when I spoke in that church after they sang, the pastor had referred to, maybe he didn't refer to it, but the words in Hatikva speak of the Jewish soul and our return. And I told them truly how they stirred my Jewish soul. Mm-hmm. And so I was there to bless, to learn, and I came away so reciprocally blessed that I pray there'll be other opportunities to continue this.
Amen. So John, I think we'll I love to leave people wanting more when we do interviews. I want to keep track of, I know it's impossible to keep track of Jonathan. He's all over doing amazing things. But we'll be in touch, and I want to know more about what comes out of this. Thank you so much. Don't go away. Y'all, this is Adam Elio Berkowitz and Jonathan Feldstein. And you're being blessed from Israel. Thanks so much.